In this video, I'm going to tell you about hobby debt and why it's a bad idea. Tabletop wargaming is not the cheapest hobby, but it's also not the most expensive. I did a video about this quite some time ago talking about the difference between, the stuff that we buy versus some hobbies that can get quite expensive. And there are also hobbies that are considerably cheaper. Some are free, really, like walking. Walking is pretty free generally. You need shoes, but you probably have shoes. Drawing, you probably have, paper, pencil, that kind of stuff. But there's a big, broad from cheap to expensive in the hobbies, the things that make us happy. And like I said, did a video about it. Pachow. But just because our hobby's not the most expensive doesn't mean that it's cheap, and you have to kind of pay attention to that. After a very quick non-scientific search, I determined that probably the most single expensive kit, actual hobby kit that you can buy is probably some sort of Warlord Titan from Forge World. They'll run you around $2,000 American. So that's pretty expensive for one model. Now, admittedly, it would not fit here in the frame with me. They're pretty massive. And they're great, don't get me wrong. I don't have one. Don't have any plans to get one, but I've seen tons of them stacked up on tables at big conventions and stuff like that. Generally, the models that we use are considerably cheaper than that. There are obviously things like airbrushes, there are things like 3D printers, there's other things that can have in the hobby, some definite expense to them. But in general, the hobby is, for the most part, relatively inexpensive. There are cheaper companies and more expensive companies and all that stuff, which we all kind of know. But the thing that's important to understand is not how perceived it is by other people. Oh, I think it's a cheap hobby. Oh, I think it's too expensive. But how it affects you. We all have a general idea of how budgets work, I suppose. I mean, you get a certain amount of income that comes in from your job or from whatever every week, 2 weeks, month, whatever. And then you have bills. You have things you have to pay for, like electricity and a place to live and all kinds of stuff like that. Some of us have some kinds of bills. Some of us have a lot more bills. Some of us have children. Some of us have elderly parents, whatever. You've got all these different things that you have to keep track of. And you want the bills, hopefully, to be less than the income. And then if there's money left over after you buy food and clothing and don't walk around naked, then maybe you can spend some money on some things that are kind of fun. And the trick is that if you only ever use your checking account and the money that you have, or maybe you keep all your money in paper money because you like diseases and the bacteria that's on money. But let's just say you do that, you can't overspend, because once you run out of money, or once that check card says, nope, there's nothing more in the checking account, then you can't spend any more money. So, there you go. But what about credit cards? So, spoiler alert, this is the crux of the overall conversation I'm trying to have with you here. The main point is this: don't go into debt for your hobby. Now, there are people out there who only ever buy stuff with their credit card, and then at the end of every month, they pay it off completely, and they're getting airline miles or points or, whatever, happy fun tickets. And that's fine. That's a different story altogether. But when you are saying, look, I've got myself a credit card now, and Lord knows, at least in this country, they hand out credit cards like candy, and that's a real problem. And there's plenty of places you can look that up online. I'm not going to pachow anything because I don't have a video about that myself. Just do a Google search and find it out if you haven't really realized that at this point, that in this country, we're kind of handing out a lot of credit cards way too much. The thing is, let's say you get one. Credit cards are not a bad idea. They're great for emergencies. Again, they're great if you're getting like your airline miles and stuff like that, and you're paying them off. But when you're given, let's say, a $2,000 credit limit, all of a sudden that Warlord Titan is like right there. Pretty available, isn't it? And herein lies the problem. If you are buying things on credit, you are, first of all, paying lots of interest. You're doing all kinds of things like that. People who are in business big businesses, small businesses, all that kind of stuff, they buy stuff on credit quite frequently because they also know that they're getting X amount of income that's coming in, and then it can, whatever, and they shift it and they pay, and they get airline miles or whatever. But you and me, who are basically just looking at a $2,000 balance or, your free credit, whatever, it's right there, it's free money. It's not free. And the trick is this: when you decide you want to spend $2,000 on hobby stuff that makes you happy, generally what will happen is that the credit card companies will say, hey, guess what? Now you have a $4,000 limit. So I've talked to, relatively recently, several different viewers who have concerns about their hobby spending. And like I said earlier, if you're spending everything in cash or based off of your checking card and stuff like that, you can't spend more money than you have. And you can do an overdraft if you write a check, but who takes checks anymore? Not too many people. If you have X amount of money, you can't spend more than X amount of money unless you start going into credit and then you start going into debt. And that's where the problem is. The thing that you're doing here, the fun enjoyment. I love my hobby. I love building and painting and playing with the little dollies and doing all that stuff. Gets really, really tarnished when at the end of every month, you either get that letter in the mail or that email that says, hey, you have to pay this much money minimum. And if you pay this much money minimum, you'll have this bill paid off sometime in the year 3000. And that can really turn your hobby into something that you can sort of dread very quickly. And by quickly, I mean very quickly. Retail therapy is a thing. If you don't know what that term is, it's what happens when maybe you're feeling bad and you decide to go out and buy something and make yourself feel better. When you buy things, it kind of releases like an endorphin thing, or I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but we've talked about this before, about how buying the miniatures is the easiest part of the entire process. If it was just as difficult to buy the miniatures as it was to build them and to paint them and all that stuff, you'd probably buy fewer miniatures, is the way that it would generally work. But since it's the easiest part, specifically when you've got plastic and you've got this, credit limit that you can just go hog wild with, it's not a good idea. The problem is down the road, it will then become something that will, at the very least, tax on you. Kind of like how I've talked in the past about having a basement full of miniatures that are unpainted can be kind of mentally or, psychically, whatever, emotionally taxing. The very same thing can happen when you have a basement full of miniatures down in the basement and you still owe money for all of them as well. I've talked about this before. I buy a lot of miniatures and hobby stuff. I've got a couple of airbrushes and I've got this machine for cutting vinyl that I can use for making stencils and stuff like that to spray on stuff and everything. And I've got lots of different little products and things like that. But what I don't have is credit card debt. I've been saving up when I see a big purchase that I want to make, like that, vinyl cutter thing was like $400. And when I sat down and said, cool, I want to buy that, then I bought it with money that I had. And, if you don't have the money to do it, then you either need to save up. You also have to take a look at it and go, is it really important that I have that thing? Is it just as important? When you're working in business, when you're trying to make a business, let's say you're getting into commission painting, then spending credit to some degree to be able to buy an airbrush or some paints or stuff like that, when you've got a job that's going to help pay for that, that's a different story. I know that if I just buy this stuff, this person's going to pay me $300 to paint their Space Marine, kill team or whatever. I don't know. And now that will help pay off for this equipment. That's how I've really kind of done most of this, is that I've taken the income that I get from YouTube and things like that and turned it not into money that I put in my pocket and pay, my mortgage with. I've turned it into lights and cameras and microphones and all kinds of stuff like that because I'm building a business. If you're just building a collection of hobby stuff, you shouldn't put it on credit. Again, like I said, if you're the person that pays it off at the end of every month because you're trying to get your airline miles, different story. Don't put that in the comments and say, hey, but I do that, because I've said it like twice or three times now. I'm talking about the people who are spending the money because they have a credit limit and they don't know any better. APR and the credit card kind of racket that we have in this country preys on people who want lots of cool stuff and figure, well, this is a very easy way to get it. And, it's great if you can take that credit card and fix your car because it broke while you were on a trip or something like that. It's a great thing to have that ability, that kind of freedom. And now you're going to have to pay it off as you go along. But it was a necessity. Putting all of your, or a lot of your hobby stuff onto a credit card and then just having that over your head. Not only do you have it over your head, but maybe because of it, you don't even paint this stuff. Maybe you're thinking, well, maybe I should sell it. I don't know. And then it just takes up space. And now you've still got compounding interest and all kinds of stuff. I'm not a financier, but I know it's bad to carry credit card debt for too long. And obviously, sometimes you have to. Medical bills, again, car payments, whatever, that kind of, or car, accidents, or you got to fix the car, whatever. There's a reason for credit cards. I'm not saying there's not. I'm just saying it's not for your hobby happiness to spend a whole bunch of money and keep it on your credit card. So I get called Uncle Adam for a reason. And partially it's because I'm older. And so maybe try to take, if you're younger, try to take some of this wisdom at heart. If some credit card company is like, hey, we'll throw you a credit card and it's going to be awesome and you'll be, it's super great. You'll have all this free money. Number one, it's never free. It's never, never, never free. It's not a bad idea to have a credit card specifically for emergencies and things like that. If you are one of those people who is trying to save up, I don't know, Amazon points or Best Buy points or airline miles and you pay it off, you put some stuff on there, you get your points, you pay it off every month, great. But getting a credit limit and then not even maxing it out, maybe half maxing it out, but spending a ton of money specifically on all this plastic crack, as it's frequently called, is not a good idea. Budget yourself, pay attention to what you're spending on the hobby. Super important and a good idea. And there's other videos that talk about that out there. But really, really, really don't put it on your credit card and then just let that balance sit because that chicken will come home to roost and it's not good for your future.